In 2003, a 19-year-old Stanford dropout named Elizabeth Holmes made an audacious promise to the medical industry. She claimed she could completely replace traditional blood draws with a single finger prick. Her proposed solution relied on a tiny collection vial called a nanotainer and a sleek, compact desktop analyzer known as the Edison. The company claimed this single small machine could process hundreds of complex laboratory tests from a few drops of blood, making medical diagnostics faster, cheaper, and painless. Holmes pitched her medical device using the language of software disruption. She sold the vision of a slick, frictionless tech product applied to the messy reality of human biology, gaining immediate traction in Silicon Valley. The public and the press were eager to champion a young, visionary founder. They embraced the narrative so completely that they ignored the total absence of peer-reviewed scientific data. To insulate her company from scientific skepticism, Holmes assembled a board of directors designed to project an impenetrable aura of authority. This chart shows the Theranos board members, including heavyweights like former Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. Notice the repeating backgrounds on the right. Despite overseeing a medical company, none had relevant experience in biotechnology or laboratory science. This political armor functioned as a magnet for private capital. Ultra-wealthy investors like Rupert Murdoch and the Walton family poured money into the operation without demanding further proof. This chart tracks the company's valuation as a result of that unearned credibility. Theranos quietly collected $700 million in funding, driving its peak valuation to $9 billion. The entire empire was built on the borrowed reputations of powerful men, masking a void of scientific innovation. Measured, behind the closed doors of the Palo Alto headquarters, the engineering was failing. The proprietary Edison machine was agonizingly slow, highly inaccurate, and only capable of processing roughly 12 basic tests. To maintain the illusion of success, Holmes and Chief Operating Officer Sunny Balwani purchased standard, bulky analyzers from commercial manufacturers like Siemens. They secretly routed the vast majority of patient samples to these third-party machines. Because commercial machines require large vials of blood to function properly, Theranos lab workers had to dilute the tiny finger prick samples to make them register. This tampering produced dangerously unreliable results. When quality control audits failed, Holmes and Balwani instructed their staff to systematically delete the problematic data points, dismissing them as routine outliers. Theranos had crossed the line from a struggling engineering startup into an active, malicious medical fraud. Despite knowing the hardware was broken, Holmes pushed the unproven technology out of the laboratory and into the real world. She signed highly lucrative contracts with Walgreens and Safeway, promising to install Theranos wellness centers inside retail pharmacies across the country. Operating in stealth mode bypassed FDA scrutiny. Thousands of real patients made critical health decisions based on fabricated data, leading to devastating misdiagnoses. Inside the company, the human cost was also compounding. Scientists who questioned the data were subjected to severe intimidation tactics and aggressive non-disclosure agreements. The pressure to defend the lies overwhelmed lead scientist Ian Gibbons. Facing subpoenas and the knowledge that the technology was endangering patients, Gibbons died by suicide. Silicon Valley's ethos of faking it until you make it proved lethal when applied to the unbending rules of human health. The deception was finally challenged from the bottom up. Tyler Shultz and Erica Chung joined Theranos as entry-level scientists, believing genuinely in the company's mission. They quickly discovered that the Edison was a prop and watched in horror as the lab manipulated vital tests for diseases like HIV and syphilis. They were 20-somethings attempting to challenge a $9 billion corporate juggernaut that was fiercely protected by high-profile lawyers. Tyler gathered scientific proof of the fraud and presented it directly to his grandfather, Theranos board member George Shultz. Confronted with empirical laboratory data, the elder Shultz chose to blindly trust Elizabeth Holmes' charisma over his own grandson's evidence. Tyler and Erica were tracked by private investigators and hit with severe legal threats. They refused to back down, eventually handing their evidence over to the Wall Street Journal. When institutional safeguards fail, exposing corporate fraud ultimately requires individuals willing to risk their own careers and families. In 2015, John Carreyrou published the Wall Street Journal expose that shattered the Theranos illusion overnight. The cascade of consequences was swift. Regulatory agencies launched massive investigations, and Walgreens instantly severed all ties with the company. The $9 billion valuation evaporated to zero, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in high-profile investments. Following a lengthy trial, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted of wire fraud and conspiracy, resulting in a sentence of over 11 years in federal prison. Yet this deception was enabled by the broader tech industry, an ecosystem perfectly primed to fund a compelling narrative without demanding verifiable proof. The Theranos scandal stands as a warning of what happens when the obsession with disruptive storytelling collides with the uncompromising reality of biology. Elizabeth Holmes built a $9 billion valuation on a machine that never worked. She maintained a carefully manufactured persona, defined by the black turtleneck and a calculated intensity, that successfully convinced the media and her board of directors. But the deception ultimately escaped the boardroom. The focus shifted from defrauded billionaires to the scientists and whistleblowers caught in the crossfire. The corporate fiction was being forced into the physical world, where Holmes's lies were about to meet human biology. Ian Gibbons was a Cambridge-educated biochemist and Theranos' chief scientist. For 8 years, he worked in labs like this one, attempting to make the Edison device functional for the sake of affordable healthcare. By 2013, Gibbons knew the truth. The planned Walgreens rollout would actively harm patients. He raised his concerns to Holmes repeatedly, but she ignored his alarms. He was caught in a legal trap. Gibbons was subpoenaed to testify in a patent lawsuit that would expose the technology's failure, but his strict non-disclosure agreement with Theranos prevented him from speaking the truth. The pressure became unbearable. On May 16, 2013, the night before he was due to testify, Gibbons attempted suicide. He died a week later in the hospital. When his widow, Rochelle, called Holmes to inform her of his death, the company's only response was to demand the return of all physical property and threaten her with legal action. Within the Theranos ecosystem, scientific truth was treated as a roadblock, and human life was processed as a corporate liability. In 2015, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services inspected the Newark lab. They issued an official finding of immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. Internally, Theranos admitted the failure. They secretly voided tens of thousands of test results, yet they failed to notify all the affected patients that their medical data was invalid. The Walgreens Wellness Centers became the point of contact where this negligence met the public, turning ordinary consumers into collateral damage. In one case, a patient received a Theranos blood test result indicating she was HIV positive. She spent months in a state of emotional devastation before a retest proved the diagnosis was entirely false. This graph simulates the experience of a male patient who received a massive spike in his PSA levels. The data indicated he likely had aggressive prostate cancer. A standard venous blood draw taken by an outside company later proved his PSA levels were normal. The Theranos results were fabricated. The data here shifts to track a pregnant woman's HCG hormones. Theranos delivered a result showing a sudden drop, suggesting an active miscarriage. This patient had already suffered 3 miscarriages. The trauma of the false data lasted until another company's test revealed she was actually carrying a healthy baby. Theranos subjected these patients to months of avoidable physical and psychological trauma, all to protect the image of a technology that did not exist. The 2022 trial in San Jose ended with a split verdict from the jury. This chart shows the collapse of the $9 billion valuation. Holmes was found guilty of wire fraud for deceiving her Silicon Valley investors. However, the jury found her not guilty of defrauding the patients. The court ordered $452 million in restitution to be paid to the investors. $0 were allocated to the patients or to Ian Gibbons' widow. The legal outcome suggests a stark hierarchy. In the eyes of the court, the betrayal of capital is a more severe crime than the betrayal of a patient's health. For Tyler Shultz, the verdict brought the relief of a weight finally lifted after years of legal intimidation and professional risk. Erica Chung moved forward by founding an ethics nonprofit, aiming to provide future tech workers with the tools to spot fraudulent players early. Holmes succeeded for a decade because she sold a compelling narrative to statesmen and billionaires, allowing the story to bypass the traditional requirements of science. By prioritizing a disruptive story over verified data, Holmes created a void, one that swallowed investors' capital, a scientist's life, and her patient's medical truth. The story of Theranos is a warning to anyone trusting their biology to a new startup. Question the narrative. Read the fine print.